obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens.
Hello, parking people. Welcome to our parking industries. And today, I guarantee you are going to have a lively presentation between old friends and parking experts. We have Clyde Wilson with Frank Del Monaco. So, gentlemen, this is going to be fun. I'm so excited. Clyde, how did the two of you meet?
Well, I was working for ABCOA Parking at the time. ABCOA is an acronym for Airport Parking Company of America. And we had just taken over Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, which is a whole nother story. That would be a great story for everybody to learn. But we had taken over Jackson Memorial Hospital, so I had been down there now off and on a lot over the next 2 or 3 years. And for some reason, and I'm not sure what it was, I had to go to West Palm Beach, and Frank was the city manager of West Palm Beach, and I met him, and we started getting into trouble right there. So that would have been about 93, I think.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yes, it's been a long time, and we've stayed in contact that whole time, more or less, until Frank every now and then disappears, and I don't know what happened to him, but he comes back.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of where we met, how we met.
Yeah, I can, growing up in the industry, Leah, as I have, especially as when I started as young as I did, you tried to seek out those that you would want to get advice from. And Clyde has always been very high on that list in my book. And so especially when I was in West Palm, I was kind of a little bit of a fish out of water. I had just moved there from New Jersey. So any friendly face was good. But, unfortunately in our industry, there's not a lot of people who have the historical knowledge of our industry and whatnot. And not only in West Palm, but throughout my 40-year career, Clyde has always been a great sounding board. And this is why I really appreciate this opportunity to participate in this.
Good. So why don't we start with Frank? What we're trying to do with the podcast is we're trying to create podcasts that do exactly what you just talked about, creating a background for people who are listening to learn about our industry. Mm-hmm. They may want to learn about you and I, but I don't think that's good for anybody. So let's try to do this in a way that we are taking mm-hmm. our experiences, which have been many, and in a way that we can spread them out and people can learn from we never made mistakes, so we can't learn from that. But let's see if we can learn from some of our experiences, is what I should say.
No, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, so I don't remember why we got involved in West Palm, but what I'd like to do is talk about you have really early experiences on what it was like to manage these really difficult, you had a run there of really difficult cities to manage, and kind of tell us what it was like, because I think what you dealt with then is still relevant today. Great lessons.
I agree. And I think, one of the things that, I often joke that this has been the longest summer job in history. I mean, nobody went to school to do what you and I did. I guess planners could probably, maybe say something like that. But in terms of parking, particularly in when I started back in the early 80s, usually the people who got put into positions of leadership and operating municipal parking systems were the people who didn't show up for a meeting and they got volunteered. Typically, you may have had a retired policeman who was on a pension and then went over to manage the system, but it was never viewed. It was never viewed at the level of importance that it should have been. I'm sure we'll get into more detail on this later, but the impact that any municipal parking system has on the economy, the quality of life in the downtown is immeasurable, yet it's underappreciated. And certainly one of the benefits I had early in my career was working for a true parking authority, not a city department. And, without boring everybody who's listening to this, an authority is designed to be a quasi governmental agency that has a certain degree of independence to run almost like a business, albeit still in a political environment. That was a great way for me to start my career in terms of looking at parking as a business. Yes, it was a public service and there was political influences, but we had our own books, we had to pay our own bills, we had to pay our own debt service. So, we had to run as close to being a private sector as possible. And then when I went to West Palm Beach, it was a city department, which means I had a lot more people involved in my daily life from the bureaucratic side. I had a city finance director. I had you always had mayors, even with parking authorities, but mayors and city councils got involved, city police chief, purchasing officers. So I certainly lost a little bit of the freedoms that I had working for a parking authority. But, looking back on it now, it made me much more well-rounded, particularly now that I have spent the last 15 years on the private side, talking with people who are now dealing with the things that I used to. And, I often say I speak two languages, and people usually say, well, do you speak, Italian or Spanish? I'm like, no, I speak English and bureaucrat. And, knowing.
I need some of that in my life.
But if you don't, you got to know your audience, right? And you got to understand that, a solution may appear to be simple to any one of us, but in a government setting, it's not always that simple. So you need to, usually there's a direct line from A to B, but in some cases you got to go around the block, and you got to understand that and help those people understand not to be frustrated by those impediments, but you got to be creative to go around them. So, again, it's been like I said, the longest summer job I ever had. I mean, I started this in college. I was sweeping stairwells and reading my, to get to where I, ultimately got to, considering where I started. I mean, honestly, I don't know how many people can say it, but I honestly wouldn't change a thing.
Good. It's great to listen to this because Frank is following the theme of boot camp that we're about to put on in about 4 weeks. And the theme of boot camp is talking to a room full of people that I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of university types and municipal types in there, and explaining to them how people don't understand. We as an industry have not done a good job of letting the people that we work for understand how valuable this industry is to them.
Absolutely.
And how hard this job is.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to talk about that and how to do that. And the other thing that you just said that I always thought was something, and I think everybody, no one really did a good job of this, including me when I first came into this business. The people in the commercial side that I was in, people in the municipal side and the university side, we never have done a good job of learning how to present really complicated needs or changes to the politicians or the people above us, which has put us in a bad position of being able to get what we need. They didn't value us, and we can't explain to them why this is important, so we get no's a lot.
Absolutely, right? and I couldn't agree with you more, my friend. But I think the one thing that wasn't readily available to us back in the day, but now is data. Right now, we have measurables now that we never had before. Right. One of the things I always dreaded in my career was going before a legislative body, recommending, a rate hike or something that may not be particularly pleasing to the general public. But, now, with the systems that are out there, you can go in there with data and actually show them the benefits or the disadvantages of not doing anything. Right. The analytics that are built into systems where you can go in and say, hey, if I extended my hours of operation by an hour, and increase the hourly rate by 50 cents. Here's going to be the difference. Back in the day, yeah, I mean, you did math, but I always found it, particularly dealing with elected officials, that, and I say this respectfully, but you had to dumb it down and you had to hand them something that said, hey, here's the facts, here's how it's going to work, and here's who's going to benefit from it. And we never had that back in the day, and that certainly made it a lot more challenging. It's certain, but on the flip side, I think, again, starting as young as I did, it forced me to learn how to talk with people, how to make a convincing argument, the art of compromise. So it really, again, it was a good education when I was younger, but I certainly wish I had some of the toys that are available today back when I started.
Back in those early days, the thing that people I don't think realize is we were dealing with tens of thousands of transactions, tens of thousands, and with no numbers, no computers, nothing. I mean, I barely had a adding machine, and to be able to put together the large pile of numbers that you need to be able to make a case just didn't exist then.
No.
But people don't understand the reason it didn't exist was because it was tens of thousands of numbers.
I mean,
and it was overwhelming to put together a meaningful, just little bit of a conversation piece. It was overwhelming to do that.
When I think back in the day, to your point, the transactions and the amount of cash. I mean, look, this was before credit card use, right? I mean, it was all cash. It was all cash, and you would end up. I can remember laying in bed at night saying, "Oh my God, how am I going to account for all this?" And the auditing of all those tickets. And one of the early lessons I learned when I started, I had two great mentors early in my day, a guy by the name of Art Ackerman and John Dalton, and both of them, it's almost on cue, said, wherever you go, always check the vehicles that your cashiers and your meter collectors drive. And if they're better than yours, you got a problem, and
right.
And it's true. I mean, but again, now you can, now, it's coming in the house long before the bank deposit's made, which is certainly a great relief. But, when I think back to the days of, the security, I mean, the amount of money these cashiers had in their cashier booths. I mean, it just amazes me how the stuff we, for the lack of a better term, got away with. Really,
the person who taught me that lesson was Monroe Carroll, that we've all heard of.
Yep.
And Monroe Carroll did it to me in one simple sentence. He said, "If your employee is smarter than your manager, fire him."
Yeah.
Because if he's a really smart guy and he's hanging out in the cashier booth, he's figured it out.
Yep. No, it's true. But again, thank God the industry has come, the technological advances that particularly over the last 10 to 15 years have been staggering. Really.
Right. The industry's come a long way, but those of us that are in the audit business still realize that, we've just moved the loss of money to different pieces of the pie.
No, but getting back to your point about the lack of respect, for the lack of a better term, for what we do.
Right.
I've been I'll read anything I can get my hands on about our industry, and in my present position, when I do talk to potential clients or elected officials, I'll ask them a question. I said, "Do you know the value of that on-street parking space right there?"
Right.
And they immediately just go to how much money the meter generates.
Daily income times a number, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, well, you're just scratching the surface. And they'll be like, what do you mean? I'm like, and there's been studies to validate this. You got to calculate sales tax. You got to calculate, sales in all these retail establishments or restaurants.
Right.
And the last number I read, it might be a little dated now, is that on-street spot is worth in the neighborhood of $300,000 a year in economic impact. And when you tell people that, they are really taken aback. And I think, to the point you made earlier, had we had the data, had we had the information decades ago to really trumpet that point, our industry may have been taken a little bit more respectfully than it was, and maybe even where it is now. But the impact our industry has on day-to-day life in most urban centers is unmeasurable. It really is.
It is, and we as an industry have not done a good job of conveying that, and so we've really been the failure in being able to put that out there. But now that it is going out there, people are really opening their eyes and having a much better understanding about what we do and what the value of it is. You're right that $300 a space has popped up, and I had it at $229. I think was the last time when I did something in a municipality. It's really hard to do a number because there's so many sources of income coming from so many places. I'm afraid that the $300,000 number may actually be low.
It may be, and I can remember
very possibly is.
I can remember throughout my career, I'll go to a local restaurant for lunch, and eventually when they figure out what you do, you become, you always want to have a food tester with you just to make sure. But I would say to him, here's your table. In your business, you rely on turnover, right? You don't want that table to be monopolized, whether all day for lunch or dinner.
Right.
And I said, the same goes for that parking space right in front of your restaurant. And why would you allow your bartender or waitress or dishwasher to park there all day?
To sit there, right?
Why would you do it?
Yes.
And again, getting back to what I said earlier, learning how to talk to people, saying, you can compare what I do to what they do, and there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. There really is.
You're exactly right. There are a lot more similarities.
So to me, once you establish that relationship, not only with just one merchant, but I always made sure I made myself available to the Chamber of Commerce or local business associations and regularly meet with them, saying, okay, hey, what are you hearing? I don't hear everything. And vice versa. So I think, developing those relationships is more critical now than it's ever been. And I think it's also more challenging now that social media is as prevalent as it is now.
Right. Yeah. So let's move on then from Palm Beach, West Palm Beach. You moved to Miami Beach, right?
Yes, I did.
To South Beach. Yes.
Yes.
And that's where Frank and I, caused a significant amount of trouble there. But what we found there was a local guy, and we'll try not to mention his name, that was paying off city officials and had some really, really, really low rents on some of the on-street park or some of the off-street parking spaces. And so Frank and I concocted a plan to go after him. And we did it because I knew what the numbers were. I'd done this too long, but this time I could look at a surface lot and tell you what the numbers were. And these were really busy surface lots on Miami Beach. Yes, and this guy was paying like about $2,000 a month in rent.
Yeah, it's there's there is a dirty political side to our business that back in the day was to your point pretty obvious, and you had to tread lightly. Certainly my tenure in Miami Beach didn't last much longer, but
probably attributed to the trouble I caused.
But again, as I said earlier, I wouldn't change a thing. You learn more from negative experiences a lot of times than positive ones, and you learned a valuable lesson, and you move on. But I still have a list of people that I know who are a little less than honest, and maybe someday they'll have to pay the price. But it was a shame because Miami Beach back in the early '90s like that was it was the beginning of what it is today, and
right.
It really much. I really wanted to get my hands on that and really mold it in the way it could have been, but unfortunately that opportunity didn't present itself.
There were a lot of forces at play there, I think much bigger than Frank and I realized at first, and it never got better. It was there were a lot of moving parts there. But those were great experiences, and I think one of the things that we can talk about here that would be meaningful, those are the early days, the 90s, 80s and 90s, and that you move forward, you manage some more cities. and you kind of grew up through this, but now you're in a little different world, but you deal with the same people every day. And how different is it today than what it was in the 90s?
You know, in anticipation of this question, I really did give it a lot of thought, and I think I think social media has changed every aspect in the world, but I think it, in particularly for this discussion, you know, people who are in government are their personality type is risk adverse to begin with.
Right.
They like the security of a paycheck. They like the security of the benefits and whatnot. You know, you don't have to put up your own money to, you know, any type of capital venture or anything like that. So you're relatively conservative by nature. Back in the day, you know, I think as strange as it sounds, you may have been a little bit more open to the idea of, hey, I'm going to try something nobody's tried before. Because if it fails, the only people around here are the only ones who are going to know.
Right.
Fast forward, we got social media now, where you got everybody in their hand has access to virtually every major newspaper, or if it's on Twitter or X as it's called now, or you know Facebook or whatever, Instagram, everybody knows if there was a screw up, you know, or if there was something, you know, some merchant, or you know, I can't believe how many letters to the editor I see on social media. And
Right.
you know, the point I'm trying to make is I think that has now curtailed a lot of creative thinking in people who in positions that I used to hold, and certainly what you have done throughout your career, Clyde. I think it's really tempered a lot of forward thinking because of fear of being criticized. Again, I don't want to sound like an old curmudgeon, but you know, there's a generation of people out there who are more interested in being liked than respected.
Right.
And, you know, and I think that this probably resonates even more beyond parking, but particularly for this discussion, I think, you know, what I have seen, and I'm sure you have seen it as well, when we go to these conferences and we see not only the subject matter that's being talked about, but how this next generation of parking professionals talk to potential vendors, and more importantly, challenge the vendors. I can't
Right.
remember the last time a person came up to me at one of the during one of the exhibits and said, you know, it would be great if it did this, this, and this. They just come up and say, well, what can you do for me? And I'm like, well, you know, I'm thinking in the back of my head, here's the questions I'd be asking. But I think in a lot of ways, you know, that social media has hurt it. And obviously social media is not going anywhere, but I think, you know, in terms of people really challenging themselves in the world of public service, social media has tempered it tremendously.
Um, Municipal parking management, I think, is probably one of the more difficult ones because of all the different things that you deal with. The thing that I never had to deal with early on in my career was parking meters, and I always used to think, you know, maybe I really just want to stay away from those. I don't see any benefit to managing parking meters. Unfortunately, none of that lasted, and we ended up auditing a bunch of them, and I enjoyed it. But can you kind of go through that transition now and what we've learned and not learned?
Well, you know, I mean, especially, you know, an appreciation for your background for auditing, you know, trying to make sure you're getting every nickel out of that thing was always very problematic. You know, you know, the toughest part back in the day was managing the keys, making sure that, you know, only the appropriate people had access to or were using the vault keys.
Right.
You know, and again, as we said earlier, everything was cash. But, you know, the one mistake that I shouldn't say mistake, the one similarity that, you know, back when I started with meters to where they are today. And I often ask this question, and I'll ask it of you, you know, do you know why most cities have a 2-hour limit?
No, I don't.
Okay. Because that was the original public policy back in the day, was dependent on the limitations of the mechanism. So that mechanism only had the ability of counting for 2 hours. Now, fast forward, that parking meter was invented in 1935. We're 2024, and a lot of cities to this day still have a 2-hour parking limit, even though most of the equipment on the street today could do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You
Count
could
forever.
have progressive rates, you can have variable rates, you can have flat rates at night, but public parking policy has not kept pace. And so, to your point, Clyde, I think there's still a lot of similarities between what I used to deal with to what's being dealt today, and it's the political courage that's lacking to allow parking professionals like ourselves to optimize and monetize those spaces to the best ability we can. And that's one thing I've noticed. But the other thing that goes hand in hand with parking meters, unfortunately, is the enforcement role. That is a necessary evil, right? You can't. I have yet to see a system that works without a threat of punishment for lack of compliance. But the one thing certainly over the last 40 years of my career, what I have seen is cities have always been reluctant to set the hourly rates at the levels they should to achieve the behavior that they wanted, but they have had no conscience in raising parking fines to astronomical levels.
Right.
You'll see a lot of cities that have maybe $1 or $2 an hour, but the parking fine could be $75 or $100. So, unfortunately, and I often use this phrase, it's really the addiction to that revenue has become really problematic in a lot of cities because that money is used. It typically goes into the general fund. It's used to fund fire, police, maybe Board of Ed and whatnot. So that delta between compliance revenue and violation revenue is cavernous. I mean, it's huge. And, I don't see it ever closing. So when we talk about the advances in technology in our industry, if we're all out to lunch and we parked at a meter and we use our phone to extend our time, most cities maybe don't want that. Maybe they want us to fall into violation because of the money they're making. So that's the balance now that was always present back in my day, but I think it's even more prevalent now that that the reliance on violation revenue is dangerously high. And I mean, throughout our career, Clyde, how many times have we seen, particularly in your career as auditing, that the receivable that most cities have for violation revenue? Right?
I've seen receivables. I've walked in the door to start an audit and seen receivables that I couldn't even count that high.
Right. So, I'm old school. If you're going to write a ticket and don't bother to collect it, don't bother writing it.
Don't bother to write the damn ticket. Right.
Don't bother.
There's the problem with one of the counter problems with that is having that source of revenue off of that method and then having the difficulty of going to a city council and saying, there's a better way to do this.
Yeah.
And they're not going to do it. But you know what? I've done this just recently because of this argument. And if you relook at the numbers, you can cover this. It's just a different way you got to do it. Mm-hmm. And the thankful part is our meter rates are so low, it makes it easy to cover it.
Yeah.
When you look at the percentages of meters that get a ticket versus the ones that pay, and you look at the low rates, you can start backing in and getting, in the couple I've done, I've never hit the exact number, but come really close to where I thought if I could stop writing tickets, we could still cover the revenue if we did a few changes. But it's hard. It really takes a lot of thinking through it. And, it's hard. It's funny. You mentioned something earlier that is so funny because it's throughout our industry. And in the on-street side or off-street side, it just like the 2-hour parking meter limit, it's still there today. I see it every day, because our parking equipment 40 years ago couldn't deal with after hours. We had a ticket spitter and a cashier and all this stuff. Take the cashier out, you got to look out for this. So we put in the little coin machines, and the after hours, the nights and weekends had a flat rate of $5, $6. Nobody really ever thought about it. Well, I have locations now that have a $6 flat rate on the weekend, and the weekend, because it's in a transient area, is busier than a weekday.
Yep.
And but nobody thinks about that rate and what it is costing them, because they're still stuck on, well, nights and weekends. Everybody has a nights and weekends rate. We need to get rid of that, and we haven't done it yet, but it's everywhere. It's in everything we audit.
I agree. And I think particularly now that we're in this post-pandemic world, right, where a lot of people are still not going back to work. You can almost guess when the peaks and valleys are going to be, usually Tuesday through Thursday now.
Thursday, right.
But the point I'm trying to make is, I think a lot of cities and a lot of parking professionals should seize this opportunity and say, okay, if we're not that busy Monday and Friday, let's price it and incentivize people to come back downtown, right?
Sure.
I mean, you shouldn't be charging if you're busy on Wednesday and you're not too busy on Monday. Maybe I should lower the rates on Monday to maybe encourage people to come back. I think the post-COVID world, I think, is going to present some unique challenges to managing not only downtowns but particularly our industry. But I think that's the type of forward thinking that we need. We can't keep saying, well, the damn employers have got to force people to come back. How about we participate in that encouragement somehow, some way? You can always go back.
Always.
But to be charging the same rate when you're not busy, I don't get it.
I don't either. And we see it. I have the numbers of all the locations that we've dealt with recently, and city to city and side of the country to side of the country, there's some variation in there about coming back to work. But basically, you can be sure that Monday is about 60% of Tuesday, Wednesday's higher, Thursday's down here back to a Tuesday, and Friday's at 40%. And I don't care if it's East Coast or West Coast. Those numbers are holding true. So the Mondays and Fridays have drastically changed, and we're not managing that very well. But again, it comes into this ability to take a risk and go to somebody and prove a number that if we do this, here's what will happen.
Yeah.
And it's hard for the people in the field to find a mentor that will look at that and go, I'll take the blame. Do it. This will work. And
that's why you usually hire a consultant, right?
Yeah, that's right. So please, here we are. We're more than happy to look at this. But it's I in my early years, more than once, I had a wonderful manager hired above me that had not been in the parking business, and I remember this one really well. So he's down meeting with me in one of my cities, and it's budget time, and he says, you got to raise the rates here and here and here and here. And I went through my discussion about why this one will do good with raising the rates, but projecting out this one right here may not be, and so forth. And he said, no, raise them. So I raised them. And at one of my locations, really, really, really good location, the revenue just fell out the bottom.
Yeah.
Right. So I had to go in without asking him. I just did it. I didn't even tell him. I remember this thinking, I'm not going to go through this discussion. I don't think he's capable of understanding the logic. And so I just changed the rate and changed it back to what it should have, not back to what it should have been, actually a better situation than it was before. Revenue went up higher than it had been before. And he didn't even know it. He had no idea. But that's out there, and it's hard to manage these tough things because they are risk takers. Every time you change a rate, it's a risk.
Yep. And in the public side, right? I mean, there's a lot of debate about I hate the term, but money grab, right? You run a monopoly. You're just here to make money. And again, I go back to my two early mentors who, I remember things now as I'm getting older that it's amazing with the clarity it has now.
Right.
No, but the best definition I ever heard was that, for a public parking system, the generation of revenue is a beneficial byproduct of a well-managed system.
Period. Right. Exactly. Absolutely.
And you should not be embarrassed that you're making money. Now, what you do with that money, okay, that's another discussion.
Different issue.
But my goal, whether I was ever running an authority or a city department, was to never have to ask for a taxpayer subsidy to pay my operating expenses or debt service. That that was just a pet peeve of mine. I needed to pay my own way, and it usually took a couple of years for the people I was working for to appreciate that viewpoint. But again, you shouldn't be embarrassed that you're making the money. Fine. You can always go back to city council and say, look, 25% of my profit, I'll pay for ambassadors downtown to walk around and help promote downtown. I mean, there's a number of things that you can do to soften the blow and to bridge that relationship with the people that you're there to serve. But, I see too many examples where people are, oh my God, I can't make that much money. Well, why not?
You see that a lot on the university side. They're really embarrassed about making money in part.
Yeah, I mean that's the ultimate monopoly, right?
They're not embarrassed about ripping us off for what we pay for tuition. No. but they're embarrassed about making us pay for parking. So let me ask the next question that has always been interesting to me: adjudication. How has that really changed over time, and is it better or worse than it was in the past? Because it's such a challenge for you guys to really, you're running a court system too.
Well, again, as a state or usually the states dictate, but it's either a civil offense or a criminal offense, right? So it becomes much more challenging when let's use a state like New Jersey, where it's a criminal offense. Now it's going through the municipal court system. So now, it becomes viewed, and rightfully so, much more burdensome for the alleged violator to contest the validity of the violation. Right. Personally, haven't operated in both. I prefer a civil offense. One, it allows you to treat the outstanding violation as a receivable, not as a criminal offense.
Right.
I hate to give, as a guy from Jersey, I hate to give credit to New York, but New York really takes it to the nth degree, where if you have an outstanding parking ticket, seriously, if you have an outstanding parking ticket in the state of New York, you can't close on a house. They will, I kid you not. So you talk about,
no wonder people hate us so much.
Yeah. Jersey never went to that extent because Jersey is criminal. But again, like a state like Florida, where I run a number of cities down here, when my receivable never got high, because we would treat it after 6 months, it went to collections. After several attempts after collection, at some point you got to write it off as an uncollectible debt and move on. Right. So to me, the best way to adjudicate a parking ticket is to come up with policies that truly minimize how many times you had to write a ticket. Getting back to that 2-hour limit again, some of the more progressive cities that we are involved with now basically just have a progressive hourly rate. You want to park there all day and put $45 into the meter, God bless you. Your job then is to provide cheaper alternatives off street to get you to park there. But as that relates to adjudication now is I walk up, the meter's either paid or it's not. I don't have to worry about, hey, did you even though you're paid, you overextended your 2-hour limit, which is, believe me, of all the top 5 things that really annoyed people who got parking tickets, it's that one. The meter had money in it. They overextended an arbitrary 2-hour limit. So to me, I would rather write less tickets, as we talked about before, but collect a higher percentage of them. But again, public parking policy impacts adjudication greatly. And and then on the flip side, getting back to the criminal side, we've all seen this. You could have one hell of a receivable, and you got the elected municipal judge who every Thanksgiving says, you know what, your ticket will be voided if you bring a turkey. You bring a turkey in. And these guys know that. They know this during the year.
They know it,
and they build up these tickets and they bring a turkey in. Okay, thanks, Judge. I appreciate it. So I think a lot of those challenges are still there. But certainly when I look back over my career, you have to be fair. It's a job that you talk about one of the thankless jobs of all time, being a parking enforcement officer. That one, wow. I'm sure that's one thing in our industry I never did, thankfully. But I just think, it's got to be part of the overall business plan and not just viewed as a punitive threat. And sadly, I don't think a lot of people have embraced that.
So what do you think a new city parking director today? What do you think are their real challenges, or what do they need to take away from our discussion today?
I think the one thing I tell every young person who bothers to ask me is you have to understand you manage perception more than anything else. People pull into downtown.
Boy,
There's no.
I've not heard anybody say it that way, but that is so right. Way to go, Frank.
People complain, oh, there's no place to park here. Yet if they go to a mall, they'll walk a mile just because they can see Macy's on the building. Right. So the perception is there's no place to park. The perception is parking enforcement officers are hanging in the corner in the shadows, waiting for me to leave just so they can write me a parking ticket. Those are easy perceptions to deal with and prove wrong. It is the ultimate shell game. Every space that's on the street has a multitude of demands placed on it. And how do you, trying to make everybody happy, God bless you. But you have to be fair, and you have to understand more than anything else, you're in the customer service business. A lot of people rely on what you do. And throughout my career, I've often made the comparison that what we do is akin to being an umpire in a baseball game, a ref in a boxing match, or a football game. If they screw up, everybody knows it. But if you do your job well, nobody knows.
Nobody knows it.
Nobody knows.
Right.
So to me, I always strived for that. Being in the media was something I never aspired to, but it's part of the job. It's a vehicle to get the message out. But I think managing perception, if I had to zero in on it, that you have to understand that that's what it's about. Right. I mean, let's look at something that's near and dear to our heart. Parking garages, right? Name me the last movie, TV show, or commercial where a parking garage was depicted well. Never. Jerry Seinfeld got arrested in a parking garage. They certainly don't do us favors, but back in the day, right? The perception was they're dingy, they're dirty. You don't want to park there at night. Right. Certainly as a female, you don't want to go in there, and nothing, if you're doing your job right, that should be taken off the table immediately. But that certainly falls in the category of perception, right? So that's what you're truly managing, in my view.
Right. That's interesting. As long as I've been around this business, I've never heard somebody put it that way, but that's
Clyde,
the reality.
I'm sure over the years, as we have shared a cocktail or two, I have probably mentioned that.
Yeah, but I didn't remember it.
But he's listening today.
Right.
So Frank, I would love to know, what advice do you have for these young operators, managers? If one was smart enough to come ask you, what would you like if an operator asked, Mr. Delmonico, how do I improve the perception of my parking facility? What advice would you give?
I would find 5 or 6 people that have done it well and pick their brain. That, Clyde, I'm sure will agree with me. We go to these national shows. There's a lot of people walking around those shows that have done this for a very, very long time.
Right.
And, we touched on it earlier. Our industry collectively hasn't done a very good job promoting itself or controlling the narrative of how it's viewed. And the reason I bring that up, our industry hasn't embraced history as well as I think it should. Again, when I started in my early 20s, I could not wait to meet people who have been doing this for a long time. Mimicking the success of somebody else is no crime. To me, that's what I would do. But I think Clyde would agree to me. I mean, we go to these shows now we're almost viewed as being like a fire extinguisher in a glass encasing. They only break it and bring us out when we're needed,
Right.
So, but, to me, I would be promoting guys who've been doing this for a long time and saying, hey, go ask them, but, so to your point, I think, I always try to tell people, view it as if your mother or your wife or your girlfriend was parking in there. How would you want them to feel?
Right.
How would you want them to feel? If it's not well lit, get it better lit. If you got to spend a few bucks and offer escort services, do it. Whether, again, perception. There's a lot of little things that you can do that, that are very obvious. But, I was taught that at a very young age. What if your mother went here?
Yeah, I think you mentioning that makes me look back, and I don't know what the actual reason for this is, but we grew up in an era, and maybe it was because of all of my relatives, all of my coaches, everybody I knew, all the men I knew were World War II guys. And we never hesitated. They never hesitated to tell us what they thought. And,
Absolutely.
But we thought it was wonderful to go talk to them. And then I fortunately started in the parking business 2 doors down from Monroe Carroll's office. So I had people to listen to, and I always listened. And one of the last jobs that we were working on that was trying to help some younger people, Krista, who's not on this call, and Trina would say to me, Clyde, they're just not listening. They're not listening. And you need to stop this because they're just not listening. And we had noticed that over the last 4 or 5 years that a lot of the young technical associated people coming in were not listening. And I think for our age, that's all we knew to do. We did it. We listened. We learned from everybody we could. Yep. And it's a big difference between
and I know
even now.
Even in the world I'm in now, I have to deal with engineers a lot, and it amazes me how they don't ask, and when they do ask, they don't listen, and it's frustrating even at that level that people who are look, particularly where I am now. I mean, some of the advances have been truly remarkable, but sure, there's certain things that the market demands of us, and sometimes you don't have to ask, you shouldn't ask why do they want it. All you have to say is yes, I can provide it. That's it.
Yes.
And don't look. Stop arguing. Stop debating. And there's a term in our business, right? Feature sets. Here's some common things that everybody looks for. And, to me, you don't make technological advances by reducing feature sets. You should enhance them. And, and this is the argument I have with engineers just about every day. Shocking. I know. Shocking.
Yeah, I know. Shocking. Well, I think we've made 40-something minutes, so maybe we'll end it now. But I think there's probably another hour of communication if we sit down and go back through this. So absolutely. I think we'll call this version 1 of the Clyde and Frank Show, and we'll start preparing for version 2.
I would welcome the opportunity. As most people tell us, and my wife and I in our social circles, they'll ask what I have done in my career, what I'm doing now, and inevitably ends up being an hour conversation because most people are ignorant to the fact of what we do. And when you take the time to really explain it to them, you can see their in their eyes. They're like, "Wow,
they never thought of it that way.
Never thought of that." So,
absolutely
right.
You're so right. Well, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a wrap for today's Clyde and Frank chit chat. I do hope we'll do a later part, maybe a part 2 or part 3 later. Good.
Absolutely.
Well, everyone, have a great rest of your day. We here at TPN, we know who we are and what we're doing. We're glad you're listening to our podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on our Parking Industry Podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.